Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is these things about even and odd properties. So a function is even, and this is going back to what we learned in Math 111. A function is even if f of x equals f of negative x, meaning that it has symmetry about the y-axis. A function is odd, which means that the opposite of the function equals f of negative x, meaning that it has symmetry about the origin. So if we're looking at sines and cosines, what type of functions are the sine and the cosine values? You can see here that when we look at these, the cosine of this angle t, so the cosine of that angle t equals x, and the cosine of negative t equals x. So since when I put in the regular original and then the opposite of the input, I got the same outputs, this means that the cosine function is even. And then when I look at the sine function, so the sine of t and the sine of negative t, so the sine of t, so sine's the y value, so the sine of this angle t is y. Sine of negative t is negative y. So since when I input in the opposite input, I got the opposite output, this is an odd function. So we can use these properties to simplify things. So for example, we know that the cosine of a negative angle, we can just get rid of that. Those are going to be equivalent. So if there's a negative inside, you can actually just get rid of the negative. And then when you're dealing with sines, if you have a negative on the inside, you can move that negative to the outside. So that's what's cool about knowing that these are odd and even functions, is that we now have this new odd and even identity that we can use to solve problems. Okay, so here's those identities or properties. Okay, so let's solve some examples without using a calculator. So if we had to find the sine of negative 420, we can use the fact that sine is odd, so that's the same thing as the opposite of the sine of 420 degrees. Okay, so we did the sine of 420 degrees in the first couple slides here, but we'll do it again. So 420 degrees, so there's 360. We need 60 more to get to 420. So that's going to be the same as the sine of 60 degrees, which gives us the root 3 over 2. So it's going to be negative root 3 over 2. Cosine of negative 30. Oh, I wrote too much there. So the cosine of negative 30, so because we know that cosine is an even function, I can just get rid of that negative. And this is going to be equal to the cosine of 30, which again, I have that handy dandy chart to look at. And the cosine of 30 degrees is root 3 over 2. Tangent of negative 21 pi over 4. So that's going to be the same thing as negative tangent of 21 pi over 4. And that's because tangent is an odd function, so you can take that negative and move it to the outside. Well, we already, on an earlier slide, found what the value of the tangent of 21 pi over 4 is, and we found that it was 1, so that means the tangent of negative 21 pi over 4 is going to be negative 1.